Hello, everybody. Welcome to our CakeFu Master Series. Today we have a really awesome guest with us. We have Lisa Berczel. I'm saying that right, Berczel?
Close enough. It's Berczel.
Brazelle. I'm sorry. I've only ever read your last name.
I tell everybody I married a Hun, so it's Hungarian.
Berczel.
Hmm.
Okay, Lisa Berczel. I should always check before I say it because I slaughter names so badly.
At least you can remember them. I'm much, yeah.
All right. So anyway, Lisa is here with us today. Lisa is just she's just an amazing artist here. She has been mostly into like body art, body
Hmm.
painting,
Hmm.
and has recently, not that long ago, right?
About 3 years I've been introduced and started to become very active in what I call edible artistry.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just not too long ago, but long
Hmm.
enough,
Hmm.
she has transferred over into the cake world, the edible art world, and does a lot of that kind of stuff now. And her skills are just unbelievable, unbelievable. You just have to see some of the work that she does. I mean, look at this picture right here. I mean, absolutely spectacular. So we're going to talk about a little bit of what she does. She has a technique that she created herself, which is pretty amazing for being so kind of new to the edible world. And so, yeah, let's talk a little bit about your past. You
Okay.
said you started out as a mechanical draftsman.
Yep. My formal training was as a machine draftsman. My summer school jobs were coming to California and doing illustrations for the family business, which did military technical manuals. So my whole background is very precise, very clean, plan for the plan of the plan. And the older I get, the more looser and freer and the more abstract I finally have been able to become. I've always envied people that could be very abstract with art. It just is, to me, it's mind-boggling. But
Well, with something, it's a learned, or with some people, it's a learned thing. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yep. I know for me, it kind of is. I think I'm more of the, I don't know, well, I don't know. I can't decide.
I'm more
I don't know if I'm
analytical, and
analytical or not.
yeah, I see everybody is most of my students are either in one camp or the other, and each has their strengths, and my goal is to try to find that middle ground because the discipline and the technical is required for clean execution, but the creativity flow is just being able to play around, mess around, make mistakes. That kind of freedom is really, really important.
It
So,
is.
hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess then I would be more on the analytical side because I'm very symmetrical with everything I do. Everything has to be clean. Yeah.
Hmm.
I have a hard time with letting things just go.
It's like
So
learn the rules so that you can break them.
exactly, exactly. And so as far as your artistry goes, you've mostly been
Hmm.
self-taught. So
Yes.
how did you get into what you do now?
Well, I am a full-time artist. I do a lot of graphic work on computer. I still airbrush the occasional motorcycle or Corvette. Uh, by airbrushing on hard surfaces, that was my relief and my creative outlet because on the graphics side, I'd moved myself up through the chain of command up to being operations managers at advertising agencies, which means I wasn't being very creative. I was telling other people what to do with their creativity. So that was the outlet. Was I finally picked up the airbrush again, and one thing led to another, and that's body painting was more successful from a public relations standpoint than the graphic and mural work, and the body painting gave me a really good understanding of pigments and safety and uh, sanitation, so that there's actually a lot of products in the old school special effects and movie world that are edible, like gelatin prosthetics. So when I was finally introduced to the culinary world through an ISIS convention in Chicago where I met Chef Rubber and a lot of other great people that were very excited about the aesthetic that I could bring in from the makeup and special effects side of things. So it's just been a really, really good synergy. And I still to this day mix and match and go cross all the mediums back and forth because they all relate, believe it or not. So that's the short story of it.
Awesome. That is so great. You know what, you guys, if you could just sit with Lisa and just pick her brain for 10, 15 minutes. She knows so much. I got a chance to spend some time with her last weekend, I guess, and the weekend before that. So I actually met her 2 weeks ago in San Diego for the first time officially, and just wealth of information. So just hopefully we can pick your brain just a little bit today.
It's not a problem. Yeah. I'm here to share because, again, as you see by the last bullet point, the first time I picked up an airbrush, there wasn't this source of information available, and I didn't know anything that I was doing. Did everything wrong. Had a very expensive piece of equipment that sat in a drawer for 10 years, and I picked it up again. And more information was available, and the world opened up to me. So if I can pay it forward and not have anybody else have to go through that frustration, that's the wonderful thing about opportunities like today and being able to share with people. And the downside is because of all this wealth of easy information access, there's a lot of bad information out there too. So I work very hard at being an advocate towards safeties, protocols, good information. And again, I want to give back because there have been a lot of people that have been there for me.
Awesome. That's good to hear. We need more people like you that are willing to share really good information. So this is awesome. And by the way, if you guys have ever the opportunity to come out to Las Vegas and take a class at Chef Rubber with Lisa, her airbrushing class I took, it was amazing. I feel like I can just go and do just about anything with airbrushing now. So definitely a little plug for you there, Lisa. It was really spectacular. All right. Okay, so we are going to talk about a really cool technique that you have created. It's wafer paper, and how you sculpt that and work with that. So I had never heard of this until you had brought it up last, in San Diego. I never knew this technique existed. So can you explain to us first what wafer paper is and things like that?
Well, wafer paper is a mundane item. It's like a flat sheet of paper that's made out of potato starch and rice flour, and it's been traditionally used just as a base for nougats in confectionery and candy world. It's just been this very lowly, very mundane thing. You will have seen some people that, you can paper punch with it, you can crunch it up and do a few things, and people have been cutting it up to make feathers, but it's always been just using it as a flat sheet. If you try wetting it, it just turns into a gummy mess. So being able to do the molding and the more structured work that you see in this particular illustration, it took about a week or so to figure out something cool to do with it, and then it took 6 months to figure out how to make it a practical technique. So most of the R&D that I do, it's like, here's this cool thing. How do you make it relevant? So the image that you're looking at, all the flowers, all the leaves are wafer paper. The little tiny ones with the little 4 petals, those are just punched. Very easy, but everything else has been molded.
That is just so cool. I just love this. This is so cool. Okay, so just a quick question. Is wafer paper the same thing as rice paper?
I have seen the term used interchangeably. I will say that, to my understanding, there are different brands of wafer paper and rice paper. It is very, very inexpensive, but I would certainly say test the product to make sure it's behaving. I'm using the Chef Rubber wafer paper, which I have been told is a combination of the potato and the rice. So that is specifically what I'm using. Try the other products out. Again, I don't know at what point it's just a generic term, but it is used for the nougat bases for chocolate making.
All right, cool. Okay, so I guess I'll just let you go ahead, and anytime you want to show something, just let me know, and I'll put your screen as the main screen.
Okay, well, let's just go into the next picture then.
Okay.
Oop, dries quickly. Oh yeah, here we're talking about why this is such a great thing. All right, the wafer paper is very, very, very inexpensive, and the tools used to do molding are inexpensive. We are using half of a press mold for flower making, petal making, and leaf veining. So it's something that a lot of artists in the culinary world already have. It's an investment they've already made. These flowers are extremely light. The big flower that you see at the bottom is probably about 2.5, 3 inches across, and we're talking about a weight in the order of a couple of grams. That dragée, that chocolate dragée in the center, weighs more than the flower petals themselves. It's very light. It's flexible. It remains. It has some spring to it, so you can fold and smush things around a little bit to get things to fit. And it likes humidity. It doesn't go soggy. It doesn't melt unless you get it literally wet with water. So there are a lot of advantages to traditional flower making. What I do stress, though, is all of the wafer paper, everything you're going to be seeing today, is an add to. It's a new technique to add to what you already do. This isn't intended to replace anything. I mean, a gum paste rose is always going to be exquisite. So can I make a wafer paper rose? Yes, but rather than take the time to do that and assemble, I've already got the skill set to make a rose. It's gorgeous, so I'll put the energy into just the leaves or filler flowers. So again, it's another tool. It's adding to. It's not replacing anything.
That's good. I was just about to ask, should you transfer over to this and just forget about, so.
That would be a shame, especially it denies you the ability to combine techniques and layer. Layering a gum paste with a wafer paper and then doing some roll icing piping, anything that layers techniques is going to look more interesting than a standalone. And that's my aesthetic, is I like layering.
All right. So tell us about the way that the wafer paper works. And how that works into how you do things.
Okay. Wafer paper comes in a sheet, and I'd say go ahead and switch the camera to me, and I'll pick up a few little things here.
Let's see. Okay. Let me check really fast to make sure that this is working.
Okay.
Oh, good. Okay, it's working. Yay! It's the first time I've ever done this, so
yeah.
So yay! All right, so go ahead and you should be the main screen. Everybody should see, and go ahead and show what you wanted to show.
Okay. Well, the wafer paper just comes in a sheet of paper. It's just very flat, and it comes in a pack of 10 to 100 sheets, and it cuts very easily. So you just cut out. I will set a little cardboard template for all my leaves and petals, or I'll punch for specialty shapes. And the trick is, there's the punches. And there's some of the molds, my favorite molds to use that you're seeing on the screen there.
Mm-hmm.
And wafer paper shrinks as it dries. So it's very, very important to experiment with your molds and test, because you want a mold shape that's round like this, because you want the paper to shrink against the form. Like this half of, this is my favorite flower petal mold. You can see it's got nice round.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives a surface for the paper to shrink against. If I used the other half of the mold, which is cup, what will happen is the wafer paper will pull up out of the mold.
Okay, and kind of fold in on itself.
Mm-hmm. You just use this half. You don't want to try pressing. Save this little guy here for making little blossoms where you want something to pull away from and curl up in on itself.
Okay.
And let's see. You can use plastic tweezers are the one thing that you're going to want. These are just like little jam tweezers. And you're going to want on silicone. You're going to want to work on silicone or silicone mats, because wafer paper, when it's wet, is very, very sticky, very gummy. And you have a fairly short work window of dipping your petal into water and placing it on the mold, and it'll just slump. It'll just go. And that's the hardest part for people to pick up, is figuring out the work window. Once you've got that little bit of experience, the molding is very easy. So that's pretty much it. I mean, give yourself about a half hour, 45 minutes to just play with wafer paper, see what the work window is, see how fast you can slip almost like a water decal. Dip into water and slip it across the mold. There should be a picture coming up that shows what the wafer paper looks like on the molds.
Okay, let me see if I can find that.
Yeah. There you go. Okay. Perfect example. Yes, perfect example. You can see at the bottom, those are leaves. And on that blue mold, you can see how the wafer paper goes transparent, and you can almost see how sticky that is just looking at it. You just set the paper on that mold and just let it dry. That's pretty much it. I will use a dehydrator to dry quickly, or I'll put it under a heat lamp from a chocolate warming box and let it dry on its own. It dries, a leaf can dry in 5 minutes. A full petal arrangement, because there's more water involved, takes a little longer to dry, maybe 7 to 10 minutes. If you're in a dehydrator or under the lights, it'll dry even faster. If you're working with warm molds, it'll dry faster still. So that's another advantage of this technique, is it's very fast. You can cut out a petal, mold, dry, airbrush, and assemble a flower in half an hour.
Okay, great.
The best way to go is assembly line, is just process. Boom, 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 boom. I will cut out a bunch of shapes and have them at the ready. The molded pieces like this, I'll mold them up and I'll throw them in a box, and no desiccant required, and just store them until I have a project, and then I color per the requirements of the design and assemble. So they last for, forever.
Awesome.
Pretty much. Yes.
That's great. Okay, so another question. Can you use anything other than a silicone mold?
Try. I know that if you're working on aluminum, like I do cherry branches, and I'll use an aluminum armature, but you've got to have a lot of oil on that. The wafer paper likes to stick and adhere. It really does. I've tried it with some plastic molds, but you're going to have a mold release agent of some sort, whether it's PAM or cooking spray. It gets a lot messier to work with, but try. And it's like with all the molds that you're looking at. You see the shape of the molds there that I'm working with, but some molds work better than others, just like anything else. See what they do. Wafer paper likes to be organic shapes. Each one of these petals, each one of these leaves is going to dry slightly differently. So as soon as they dry, they already have the individuality of nature. This process doesn't like to be highly structured. Lots of tight right angles, or just let it be nature. That's what it wants to be. Let it work with what it wants to do, and you're going to be a lot happier.
Awesome. Okay, so an overview of basically the process. So you're going to just dip it in just plain water? Does it need to be warm or cold? Or?
Yep. When you're learning, the cooler the water, the better. The warmer the water, the less work time you have. The faster it goes from a flat piece of paper to just going sagging and slumping. So when you're learning, run with colder water.
Okay.
And, yep.
That's a good tip.
Right,
so then you're going to just get off all the excess water?
Yep, just drag it along the edge of the bowl. Dip, drag along the edge to get off the excess, and have your mold right there, and just slide it straight onto that mold, and you'll watch it sag. And if it's not completely in contact with the mold, you can use a mop brush that's damp to just push it into the crevices of the mold. You can use a finger if it's damp, and again, just push into the crevices of the mold. What I see people do is they overwork and they just go crazy and pouncy, and you can tear the wafer paper because it's very soft at this point, and you just won't get as good of a mold. One more thing, wafer paper has two sides. It'll have a smoother side and it'll have a dimply or rougher side. If I'm doing a flower, I'm going to put the smooth side against the texture mat. If I'm doing a leaf, I might put the rough side down because then you get the leaf pores and it's a little bit more interesting looking. So again, experiment. It will take a little bit of experimentation.
I like that. That's cool. It gives you two different mediums almost to work with. That's great.
Yes.
And I saw in the last slide that once it's set down, you don't want to move it, right?
Nope. You can't pick it up and move it. It'll just be gummy, worse than a wet paper towel. You can pull it off and put a new petal on. If it's already touched another petal, just let it be. Although, if it's not the prettiest mold in the world, put it at the bottom of a flower, put it at the bottom of a design, let it be bulk for something else. The really, really pretty stuff, or the pieces that came out really nice, set those aside and reserve those for your heroes. Because the wafer paper shrinks when it dries, you'll see that the wafer paper on that mold is shrinking in two directions, side to side, and it'll shrink in length. That's why in this particular picture that's up right now, you'll notice on the flower mold that the wafer paper is actually going a little bit over the end. It's because I'm locking that in place so I can keep the length. Now that petal will shrink up a little bit. And that can be cool because, you can take this same mold and just how you shape and how you cut the petals is going to give you different effects. I can take that mold and do spider mums. I can make a butterfly. I can make a bow. Again, adaptive. Think adaptive instead of literal with this mold. If you overlap the petals too much, too deep, it's not going to look as lifelike. It's going to look a lot more heavy-handed. It can even tear as it dries because, again, you've got these two pieces of paper and they're shrinking away from each other, and if you're too much, something will just give and it'll start tearing. So again, it is going to take a little bit of practice to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. Sorry, drinking water.
I'm just getting over a cold, so if you see me hacking away, I'll try and mute it first. But okay, so on the next slide. Oops, I went too far. Sorry. if you want to just go ahead and talk
Yeah.
about this.
Yep. Here we've again, it's more of what we've been discussing. Uh, it acts as its own glue. All you need is water, and where these two petals touch is where they will glue together. And multiple molds. I work assembly line fashion. I have a couple of molds and a couple of veiners, and I will just cut out, work all my cutting at the same time, all my molding at the same time, all my drying at the same time, and I'll just work in racks. And it's very, very quick that way. You just get into a routine, and it's very speedy. And again, talking about, and I can't stress this enough, and you see it on the blue mold here, just because a mold shape is a certain shape doesn't mean you have to use it all. I can use one mold, and just by cutting the petals or the leaves in different outside shapes, I can get a lot of variety. And that's a really good thing. It's a way to be frugal, and it's a way to think beyond the literal of, oh, this is a hollyhock mold, so I must make hollyhocks with it. No. Mix it up a little bit. Experiment, and like I said, that 5-press generic mold, I make butterflies, bow ties, mums, big cherry blossoms, small cherry blossoms. Again, just think bigger than the literal.
Okay, thank you for covering for me. I honestly have been hacking away the last few days and just oh, please let me get through this thing. Okay. All right, so to dry it, you heat it. Is that what you
Yeah, you can either let it air dry on its own, and that'll work just fine. A $10 heat lamp bulb from Home Depot will also work. It's the same bulb that you see in sugar boxes. That will dry from above. A dehydrator works brilliantly. What you don't want to do is set it in front of a fan, because as soon as this paper starts to dry, it'll start lifting up off of the mold, and it's so light it'll just blow away.
Fly away.
It'll fly away. You can put it, if you've got an oven with a pilot light, set it in there. You're looking at something about 95 to 100 degrees. You don't need to overdo this. And once the molds are warm to the hand, they will dry faster. When you're first learning, everybody uses way too much water, so they're going to dry a little slower. You can watch the wafer paper dry. It goes from that almost clear, transparent, gummy mess on the blue to where on the flower mold you can see it's going back to white. Okay. So if it's completely white, it's dry. And you can watch, it'll want to stick to the mold a little bit if it still has a wet spot. Sometimes it'll release, other times that wet will stick to the mold while you pull the rest of the wafer paper away, and then you have a hole in a mold. So when I'm demolding and putting in my boxes for storage, just make sure everything's good and dry, because if there is a wet spot and it touches another item, they're now going to dry together and want to stay together in harmony forever, unless you literally break one away from the other. Okay,
that's good to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can't remold effectively. Say you don't like the way that one leaf came out, I'm going to put it back on. No, just make another leaf.
Okay, so let's talk about if it gets too, or can it get too hard?
It can be too brittle. When they're first coming out of the dehydrator, out from underneath that light, they're very, 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 very dry, and that's when they're their most brittle. So you don't want to snap it off of a mold.
Work if it's Just get up here. There you go.
Okay. If it's on a full mold, half of it may be lifting off on its own. Another portion, like over here, may be stubborn and staying down. So just take your thumbnail and just pop it up off the mold. Work it, pop, pop, you're fine. If it's so dry and brittle that if you get heavy-handed with it, it can crack it. Let the wafer paper, sit for a few minutes, let it reacclimate to the ambient humidity in the room, and it's fine. And you'll see with this piece here, you can see how flexible that is.
Oh, wow.
You know, there's a flat shape. And let's see how far it goes before I break it. So I'm almost folding it in half. You can just barely start to hear it cracking.
Oh, wow. That would be really convenient for assembly purposes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
And if you heat it up a little bit in your hand warmth, again, just a tiny bit of humidity, you get even more. So
Even more. Great.
Touching the sides together. Again, something you can't do with gum paste and pastillage and traditional techniques. This is the other nice, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but when we start airbrushing, it adds just enough moisture that you can flatten out or remold slightly. Like you want that little leaf to curl up.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see. Right,
and if one of these hits the floor, it probably won't break. Now, if something does crack, if something does break, you got in a rush, whatever, you can patch this. You take a little wafer paper patch and you patch it. You just tear a little square of it and dip it in your water and patch it from the back side and let it dry on its own. So it is patchable to that extent.
Perfect.
Now we get into coloring.
Yay! Okay, so we're gonna let you talk a little bit about airbrushing, and then and how to incorporate that into your flowers.
Okay. Wafer paper likes airbrush as long as we're not like painting the barn door and applying a lot of color too heavy. Wafer paper also, once it's molded, has a lot of shape to it. And what we want to do with the airbrush is accent and highlight what we've just made with the mold. It's going to be more interesting that way. We're going to use the color of the wafer paper as part of the design. Since the airbrush spray is a cone, just like a flashlight beam, it's going to spray straight in a bullseye. And that's what you see at the top. If I held this leaf up and sprayed straight at it, I would just paint it green. If I turn the leaf on its side and airbrush across the surface like this, I'm going to catch paint on the edges and the ridges of the molded shape. I call it catching paint. And this works obviously really well with leaves in nature. It also works with any other texture mold that you're doing. So you're reinforcing detail. Think of adding color as reinforcing detail rather than just changing the color. Because I can now use a dark green, a light green. I can run a little bit of brown down the center. And you're going to end up with a much more lifelike and realistic end result rather than just taking a white object and turning it into a green object. Awesome. So that's what you're seeing in that slide.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, you talked about how how when you turn things, it changes the cone.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
You see how at the bottom we're literally catching paint. We're catching the edge of the overspray across this shape.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so here's our leaves.
Yes, you can see that's a really good example of how I'm spraying flat and I'm bringing up that leaf into the spray, just on the bottom edge of it. I'm shooting across it, not at it.
This is a great picture, by the way.
Thank
Someone's
you.
got some photo skills.
Well, we do all the photography that you're looking at, so thank you very much. Here we're talking about alcohol-based colors versus water-based colors. We're molding with water. The water-based colors go on very nicely, but you got to be light with it because, again, you get this too wet, you've got a gooey piece of wafer paper. These airbrush colors are so pigmented that you don't need a lot of color. The alcohol-based color that I'm using is the luster. and it has just enough alcohol in it and some other ingredients that it encourages a very, very rapid evaporation of the moisture. So it acts as a kicker. It just is very quick. So I will often use the pearls and the lusters to just accent. My primary color is going down in a blue, and then I've accented with a purple pearl. Or with this leaf, I've done my primary colors, and then I'm going to come in and just give it a tiny, tiny kick of like a leaf or a mint green. And it's, again, to give it that luster or shine or dewiness effect without heavy-handedly just coating the whole thing in pearl. And it's also a way to use much less of the pearl product, which tends to be much more expensive anyway. So you're giving the pearls a base to play with. And you'll notice, again, I'm using different colors and layering them. It doesn't take any longer to airbrush an item 2 or 3 colors as opposed to 3 passes of the same color. So you get a lot better payoff for the effort.
Awesome. This is all stuff that you've taught in your airbrush class that I was like, yay, I know this. This is really good information. So, okay.
And here you see that I'm layering colors. Purple is going down, and it's purple pearl. It's almost invisible. It only catches that purple glint in certain angles or in photography. And I've also airbrushed across. I've caught paint with that blue. That's why you see the ridges so well where the tweezers are. Is, again, I'm taking full advantage of what that mold is already giving me rather than just painting in a color.
Awesome. And did you attach these before you airbrushed the color onto them, or?
Yes, this is what you're looking at there is the blank version of a molded flower petal. So this 5 piece is all white, and it came out of a box. And this is what I held with the tweezers and airbrushed. So the 5 individual petals have been molded onto my 5-petal mold and allowed to dry in place. And then it's stored until it's color. I just happen to really love the blue with a little bit of purple. It's kind of a fantasy color, but it just works for me. It makes me happy.
It is a good color. And very trendy right now, too. So.
Well, you can... Cocoa butter... the wafer paper likes fats. It likes colored cocoa butter. It likes piping gel because it's a very low moisture content. So you can rim the edges of these petals with lines of gold. I show students how to just take piping gel, rub the edge with a cotton swab, and then just use that cotton swab applied piping gel to pick up loose luster dusts. So it looks very, very pretty, and it's a nice way to add texture, and the wafer paper will support it. You can airbrush with your classic vodka and lusters. Wafer paper doesn't like too much alcohol. Like, you can't replace the water with alcohol and expect it to work. It does this really frizzy, snappy thing, and it just literally does not work. But for little bits of edging, you can get away with it. But again, experiment. There's a nice way to take these flowers and make them look like porcelain. Go ahead and do your edging. That's all trendy right now, and the center of the flower can be one of your button molds instead of a regular center. So again, there's a lot of variety to it.
Very cool. This just honestly opens up a whole new world of, places to go with all of this. It's great.
Yep. Now, assembly, again, is very easy. Here you're seeing unpainted flowers, some loose dragées, and you stack the pieces together. And I'll just put a dollop of piping gel dead center on and do the underside of the next layer. So you've got piping gel against piping gel. Lay them over top of each other. If they're not wanting to set flat, put a little weight on top, just like this, and come back in 2 or 3 minutes, and it'll be glued together enough. The piping gel is sticky but flexible and movable. It'll set up 2 pieces together in about 2 minutes. They'll be repositionable for about 10 to 15, depending on how hot and dry the environment is. And then it's just perfectly sturdy. So all of the assembly that you're seeing here was with clear piping gel.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, look at how gorgeous they look. I just love it.
And there's little blossoms, there's little flats.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 different flowers that are assembled there. You can do 2 layers, 3 layers of the petals, just whatever you want.
Awesome. And I love the coloring of those leaves and the gold tones and the blue and the purplish and pinkish. And
the leaves look really incredible if you airbrush them a green base and then use like an antique gold. So if you're doing an anniversary cake or a celebration cake along those lines, you can go into some fantasy colors that just look so expensive, and they're so light. And because this wafer paper is so light, you don't have to put a wire on each and every thing. You can if you want to. I will use piping gel to glue a wire on the back of a flower. I'll poke it up through the first layer, wrap it around, and then it's literally between the 2 layers of flowers like this. And you could put it on a leaf if you want to, but that's really only when you need something to be up and off of the cake. Otherwise, the piping gel will allow you to have a flower literally stuck to the cake wall and going out to a side like this. And it's so light that you can do things that you just can't do with the conventional weighty pastiage or gum paste flowers or leaves.
Mm-hmm. I love the idea that it's so light, because I know we talk a lot about how you shouldn't stick wires in cakes and things like that, especially when you're doing competitions and and so to have something like this that's so light that you can just kind of stick to the side and not have to have it falling off and weighing down. This is really cool.
And the product it plays well with your whipped frostings and your buttercreams. Buttercreams have enough butter content that it'll hold up. I mean, will it eventually go soggy? Yeah, but just the same as it would if you were using, again, your gum paste or your fondant techniques.
Okay. Well, good to know. Okay, and here's some of the things that we have a few pictures of things that can be done with this wafer paper. So
yes, the branch is wafer paper. It's hollow. There is no structural support in that other than the rigidity that I got from making the mold. You can see that I've got flowers coming literally up, off, and away from the cake with no armature. Those are all cherry blossoms, and there's a little tiny bit of fondant for the green and yellow on the inside for the center. So you can also see that there's some plain dragée and wafer paper cherry blossoms. The branch was molded, and the inside armature was pulled away. It was just crushed aluminum, and it was painted with colored cocoa butter, and then it was dredged with cocoa powder, because I wanted that branch to have that dry, barky feel.
It looks amazing. It really does. Okay, and I know everybody's going to be asking, what is the cake? What's the surface of the cake? Because that's cool.
Let me talk about the dragonfly for just a second.
Okay.
The wings of the dragonfly are wafer paper. The body is gum paste. Remember that blue leaf mold that we looked at a couple slides ago? Those wings actually came off of that mold. I used the center spine of the leaf mold to be the top edge of the dragonfly wing. So I just molded a bunch of leaves, and then I carefully cut them after they were dry to get the shapes that I wanted, and that's assembled with just a patch of wafer paper and piping gel again.
Very cool.
The cake background itself is a glazing technique that mimics porcelain. So in this specific instance, there is an edible icing sheet that was applied to my fondant base, and I use that because there's very, very intricate crackle pattern. Could I have painted that on the cake and not used the edible icing? Probably. But in this specific instance, there's a layer of edible icing sheet. It was airbrushed blue and brown, so I got my gradients. And then a very thin layer of clear piping gel went down. Edible glitter was dredged onto that first layer. And then a thicker trowel of clear piping gel went over top because I wanted to catch air bubbles and I wanted to keep the edible glitter as big and open and out as possible because I wanted to create that crackle glaze texture and look to it. So that's how you get that kind of shine and that kind of texture and behavior. And it holds up as an effect until the piping gel starts to haze. So 36, 48 hours later, again, depending on the humidity, it'll finally start hazing over and getting more of a milky color.
Okay. That is just so cool. I love that. We could do a training on just that. Very cool. Okay, so this is some of your cocoa painting that you do.
Yes. This is a glass bowl, a square glass bowl. This is kind of to show what can be done for the most exotic punch bowl ever. The pebbles at the bottom are molecular gastronomy. So these could all be flavored. They're edible. They're all the rage. As you know, you can have little floaty fizzies in your drink. The fish are reverse painted on the inside of this glass bowl, and they're cocoa butter. The little froggy is cocoa butter painted, gum paste, and dragé little sculpture. He does have wire armatures in him for his little arms, and he's crawling out of the pan. Of the bowl. He's painted in cocoa butter because that actually acts as a very good waterproofer. The lotus flower that you're seeing, there's a leaf and flower separate. Those are wafer paper molded that have a very thick dipped coating of cocoa butter. And it's assembled, the cocoa butter allows you to assemble these leaves a piece at a time just as you would any other chocolate flower work. So I'm using the structure and the lightness of the wafer paper to replace all the extra weight that there would be for a conventional chocolate piece like this. So that flower will float in the water for a couple of hours, and that flower was a really big one, and I think it may have weighed 3.5, 4 ounces. It's about 6 inches across.
Oh, wow.
So
that is just so cool that you can put that in water. I mean, water and cake just don't mix, and so this is just so cool. No.
If the water gets too warm, cocoa butter starts melting at that 85, 88 degrees. So if the bath gets too warm, and the water will finally find a crevice, and it'll get to the wafer paper, and the wafer paper will absorb the water and spread like a sponge, and it'll start pushing the cocoa butter up off of the structure, and that's when it'll start finally disintegrating.
Okay. So yeah, it lasts a little while, guys, not forever.
Yes. Yes.
There's another angle of that.
Yes, and this was lit from below, so you can see that the light, even though there's a thick layer of cocoa butter on these leaves, you can see that you get light through them, so you get that realistic sense of airiness and translucency that you see in a lot of these petals and flowers in nature. And again, that's what we're trying to mimic.
Awesome. See, isn't she a genius, guys? I love this. Okay, and so then this is?
That is a life-size bird of paradise. Mm-hmm. And that bird of paradise is wafer paper. It's again painted with cocoa butter. By the way, I love working with cocoa butter.
Yes.
So there's a lot of hand layering and texturing. The orange is wafer paper that I actually used orange water to mold the wafer paper. For whatever reason, pigment in the water affects the drying process and it affects the end result. It's stickier, gummier, longer. It dries a little thicker. It has to be a pH or a chemistry thing. So if you want to experiment with turning your water a color first, go ahead, but understand it, it's going to behave differently than just plain water. But I really wanted that intensely vivid orange and purple for the petals. The cocoa butter is slathered on top. It's assembled with cocoa butter. There is a boba straw that is going down as a support. That entire flower, boba straw and all, weighed 7 ounces, I want to say. It's hollow on the inside. The leaves were molded straight off of a bird of paradise leaf. I didn't make a mold for that. I did use a paraffin release spray for that, and I had to run through several leaves before I got enough that didn't get too torn up or shrunk or curled the wrong way. But those are all wafer paper that you're seeing there.
Spectacular. Okay, and this, you demonstrated this at the San Diego show a couple of weeks ago. This is so cool. Love it.
This flew to Austin for their show, and I was very fortunate there. The piece did very, very well, and it survived the flight there and back and the trip down to San Diego because, again, I was invited to display the piece there. So there's another water lily wafer paper piece there, and it's about 6 inches across, and again is weighing, I want to say maybe 3 ounces, and half of that weight is the cocoa butter. The cocoa butter on that flower is much heavier than the actual wafer paper that was used.
Awesome. Okay, and so what are these fish standing on?
That's 3 tiers of isomold. And the fish, I created a rubber stamp, and I actually just finished a how-to for American cake decorating for this, so I'm very excited on that side. But I made my own rubber stamp for my own sketch, stamped it on the inside of the curve, and then hand-painted all the cocoa butter colors. So the fish that you're looking at, you're looking through the isomold to the painting.
Yeah, and so it's your reverse painting, and this is something we should, have you teach. Also, you just know so much. It's so cool. Well, I actually took a class on your cocoa butter painting at Icy's last year, so very, very informative.
Mm-hmm. And there's all the blue that you see is airbrushed accents on the isomold, and then there's a little bit of pearl added.
And these little beady things down at the bottom?
Those are isomalt. They're isomalt pebbles, and I developed a technique that mimics fused glasswork, but I'm using pasta as an armature, and it allows you to have something to grab a hold of with your tweezers and help manipulate. It's just so much easier to work with these shapes using that base underneath. And this is an offshoot of a necklace class that I teach that is basically making glass beads with 0 molds. And you'll also see my one of my mentors and biggest fans out there, Peggy Tucker, teaching this technique as well. She was one of my primary technical advisors for, again, I've got this really cool idea. I know there's something that's really great for the industry. How do we take that idea into something that is practical? So that's what she was a champion of. So yeah, it's a lot of fun playing with lusters, playing with crushed glass effects. It's just the opportunities and the ideas are endless there as well.
They're just so cool. Another shot of that same thing.
Yep.
Isn't that just spectacular, you guys? Just love it. Okay, we have so many questions. Boy, we have lots of questions. So
rattle away.
We will get going on those. Try and get a few of them asked. Okay, let's see. Good question. For our first question, Lisa Menz asks, where do you purchase wafer paper? I know you said it, but let's explain.
All the supplies that you're seeing me use on this particular piece, the colorants, the airbrush colors, the lusters, the wafer paper itself, were from Chef Rubber. They are one of the companies that I tell everybody enable me. In other words, they indulge my artistic eccentricities, and they give me products to see what I can do with, see what I can break a few rules with. So the cocoa butter color, everything is from them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chef Rubber is great that way.
Yeah.
They're just so I think they just love to see the art and
Yes.
the new, and they want to
Yes.
be a part of that. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're very good at admiring and honoring the traditional techniques, the traditional work ethics, and at the same time, they're very proactive in championing new and innovative techniques. Again, humble, lowly wafer paper that's almost a throwaway, almost a necessary evil to have on the chocolate side, and all of a sudden you can do these things with it. That's what they wanted to see out of people. Yeah, that's what they want to foster. So I'm very fortunate on that side.
That was great. Okay, let's see. Veronica asks, can you dry brush it with petal dust, or can you vodka plus petal dust to color it?
I have had students tell me that they can dry brush. It's not a technique that I use a whole lot of because I have my Grex airbrushes and I really like to airbrush. So I don't know how strong the color transfer would be, but I do know that it can be done. As far as mixing your petal dusts with vodka in painting, yes, it can be done, but I would restrict that to accent work, because if you took a molded flower piece or a leaf and just dipped it into a vodka and petal dust mixture, it would just disintegrate. It would crumble and disintegrate because of the alcohol content.
Awesome. There are quite a few questions asking about the strength of this. You want to show them again what you did with that flower?
Sure. Okay, I'm going to move slow so the camera's not freaking out. Here's a flat 5-petal that was molded off of this mold. I'm now touching.
Okay, so it is flexible, but it is strong.
It is strong. I finally broke it. Okay. And that was with pushing it and pulling it back apart. It's not gummy at this stage, but it is pretty strong.
Okay. But if it's at a higher heat, it's more likely to be...
If it's at a higher heat, yeah, the drier. It's not so much the heat, it's the dryness. The drier it is, the more brittle it is. That's why I say this technique likes a little bit of humidity.
Okay, so if you're in a really dry place, you may have a little bit more of an issue with breakage.
Correct. Okay. Correct. But when you first airbrush, this is another reason to go with the airbrush route instead of the dry brush route, is when you airbrush, you're introducing a little bit of moisture to it. So if you airbrush and then assemble, everything's still just a little bit more flexible so that you can weight those two layers together until they glue. You can also add a little bit of steam to a flower, a leaf base, if you want it to curl just a little bit. The wafer paper is stronger when it's molded than when it's flat. When it's flat, it's more porous. It has a grain to it, just like paper. But when it's molded and it has a chance to reform on that shape, you're using the engineering of that shape to impart structural strength. Just like in car and automotive making, you take a flat sheet of aluminum and you press mold it into the hood of a car. The hood of a car is going to be able to stand and bear a lot more weight and have a lot more engineering support structure to it than just a flat sheet.
Awesome. Okay, here's a quick one. Does it come in only white, or does it have to be colored? Yeah. Does it come in colors? It
comes white because, again, this was originally designed to just be a support for nougats. I have seen people run the wafer paper through the edible inkjet
Cool.
machines. So you can print on it. Again, it's kind of soft. It's going to be a little bit more brittle because of the alcohol content in those inks. So you can do that. Now, whether or not you could take that printed edible ink sheet, cut it, dip it in water, and mold, I don't know. I haven't played with that. Somebody try it out and tell us.
Exactly. Okay. Let's see. Someone asked, can you attach floral wires to the petals?
Yes, absolutely. What I would do is push a wire up through, just bend a loop, and pull it back down so that you have a circle of wire on the top and your stem coming down the center. Then you can add your second layer, and your little wire bed is completely hidden. You have your wire coming down. That works quite well. You can take a leaf and attach wire, just again, piping gel, and set the wire curved, set the wire against the shape, let it dry in place. I would use the cloth wrap, that the thread wrapped, because that gives the piping gel something to sink into, and it makes a better bond. If it's just the plastic coated stuff, it doesn't work as well.
Okay. And you'd probably want it to be pretty close to the same color that you're working with. So
right.
Either white, or if you're doing leaves of green.
Right. And since you don't necessarily have to wire each and every leaf, you can get away from having to do the green floral wrap as much. So you can end up with a much lighter and much more refined wire stem than, again, traditional techniques. The little green leaves that would be on the bottom of the flower, again, those don't all have to be stemmed because they can be glued straight to the bottom of your flower base.
Perfect. All right. Debbie Beasley asks, and this will have to be our last question, I think, because we're running over a little. She says, if you overspray and the flowers or leaves become wet, where do you place them to let them dry without taking on another form?
Set them on a sill mat. If they go completely soggy flat, that's it. But if they're just a little softer than you want, just set them on a sill mat and let them dry out until they get the level of softness that you want for working with. But again, because the wafer paper is so inexpensive, if something like that happens, just grab another one.
Awesome. All right, and here's a little bit of information on where you can find Lisa. We have one class that you have coming up at the Cake Cottage. That's there in San Diego. Well,
Murrieta.
Yes, it's Murrieta, which is close to San Diego.
Yes.
And then your website is battledress.biz.
Yes, there's a lot of body painting on there, and there's also pages for some of the culinary pieces too.
Yes, I've actually been on your site. It's very cool stuff.
Hopefully it wasn't too scary for you.
There's some really interesting stuff on there for sure. Awesome.
Yeah, I am a bit of an odd duck.
Well, a lot of cake decorators have the same type of interest, and so I think it would be fun for everyone to go look at it. If
there are additional questions and they get routed to me, I'll be more than happy to answer them. I am on Facebook, and I can, again, it's ask away, because if one person has a question, that means 10 or 15 other people were thinking of it too. So yes, obviously. Okay, well, thank you so much, Lisa, for coming and joining us today. Thank you guys for listening. I apologize for my cold, and hopefully it'll all be gone by next week, and I don't have this problem. So anyway, thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoyed the training today, and we will see you next week. Bye.